And I have discovered through the auspices of Russell Investments, they are a wonderful outfit, by the way, a Dr. Jeff Belkora. And this is his life's calling. And he's going to walk you through about making sure that is complicated, as specifically unique to the person that they're going through, how to help you through that, how to structure it, how to make sure that you come out on the other side of this thing intact, that when you're that first call, that you're prepared, you're eligible, and that you don't exhaust yourself. So I'm going to bring Jeff up, whoever Jeff may be. Here's Jeff. So we have gone through, we have gotten to know each other pretty well. Probably all know Jeff. He is working the crowd, let me tell you. So, thank you. So I want Jeff to tell you his life story, his life callings, and how it applies to you.
Thanks, Sharon. Should we sit down?
Yeah.
I see they took the Kleenex away for the guy on stage, but I was off there saying E before coming up here. Although the gift of leadership that advisor gave us, you talked about those small moments, it was also now when I say E, I'm also singing happy birthday. So, it's a pleasure to be here, and I want to just explain a little bit. It's kind of hard to explain who I am and what I'm doing because I'm a doctor, but I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a systems engineer, and I fell in with a group of medical doctors when I was in graduate school because I was studying decision-making, decision science, and I was particularly interested in sort of how the heart meets the head, how advisory professionals can guide people to good decisions. And so it turned into this whole journey of the doctors telling me, medical doctors telling me, well, that's what we do. And so I got involved, and the first medical doctors that I got involved with were breast cancer surgeons. So it's not entirely unfamiliar for me to be in an audience of this many women, because I spent about 5 years working in that field exclusively and then branching out to other cancers and other medical conditions. And the welcome I got there was just terrific. There were some concerns. I worked with a grassroots organization, advocacy organization, and one of the really fierce activists said to me, Jeff, we don't know quite what to do with you. You have 4 strikes against you. You're male, you've never had breast cancer, I was young at the time, and you're an engineer. And we can't decide which is the worst thing. But no, they were really, really welcoming. And I ended up taking the tools that I was developing, that I'll talk about in a minute, and accompanying 200 women during my PhD dissertation, 200 women with breast cancer on their journey to visits with surgeons and medical oncologists. Unbelievable access that they gave me, but in part because I was delivering a lot of value. I was helping them through the decision-making process. So about 6 months ago, I got a call from Kevin Hofberg at Russell, and I've known Kevin 10 years or more, and he's been kind of following my work in medicine. And he said he had one of these moments where he realized, just like the surgeons had said to me earlier, hey, that's what we do over here in financial services. So now I'm working with Russell. We just got started. And you were so kind as to say, well, let's get on stage and talk about this at the Women's Summit. So here I am. Thank you.
I know it, because this is so deeply personal, because I think about what Marcia and Joy did for me, and knowing fully well they're not only doing that, and you're not only doing that for your clients, but you're going through your own personal journeys, struggles, life, because life happens to everybody. And we ask of you to be so strong and so prepared, and then meeting Jeff and having a chance to spend some time with Russell, what they think, how they think, and what they believe their role is in the financial services industry and on advocacy issues as well. We connected here, and it was clearly poignant for me, having gone through such crazy stuff this year. But what occurred to me is that this is about life, and what you deal with is life. And if we can in any way help you to deal with the real life, momentous things that happen every day, the miracles that you help to impart, making sure that you're taking that kind of care of yourself, that you understand these things, and then how to translate that, what you have, into a structure, is pretty daggum amazing. And that's what this group has done. So are you going to go through your slides now and talk about, because it's fascinating where the science meets the emotion, And that's what he's done, and he's captured both. It is powerful stuff, so go.
Yeah, let's just go through 6 slides. It'll take about 10 minutes. And this is like a sneak preview, really, of where we're going. Russell is helping me translate this work in medicine to financial services. And I've been talking to many of you throughout this conference, and I've really learned that there's just connection points with what you're already doing, which is great. So I'll reference a few of those. But in essence, in medicine, what I discovered was a real need was for medical doctors, and I know you'll appreciate this, for medical doctors and their team members to be able to really discover the patient agenda, to discover what your goals and priorities are. And we talked about how important it was for you, for one of your surgeon, to be an advocate to translate what your preferences were about how aggressive to be with some treatments and how to preserve quality of life and make certain trade-offs. So that's really the process of discovery. And so lo and behold, I think you all use the same word with client discovery, discovering the client agenda. And then engagement, and specifically engaging patients in decision-making. We've developed models over the years, and I'll talk about them a little bit more, to really help people walk through a decision process. And I've been asking many of you in this conference, do you have such a process? And really many of you have said no, not something where we can kind of in a repeated and systematic way that honors both the head and the heart, walk people through a decision, a complex decision, such as your clients are facing in their financial decision making as well as their other life types of decision making. And then finally, in medicine, even more so maybe than here, there's this enormous pressure. The financial incentives are all messed up. There's enormous pressure on time. And so you really need to leverage the entire team and make sure that you're using, we have an expression in medicine, everyone needs to be practicing at the top of their license. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these things, again, just to give you a preview, and at the end of our presentation, we'll give you an email address where you can follow up for more information if it's interesting. I do want to say that in medicine, we have the good fortune of having the National Institutes of Health. And so this is a government agency that funds about $1 billion a year in social behavioral sciences. So I'm not aware of a National Institutes of Financial Health. I think we probably need one. But in medicine, we do get this opportunity to do very rigorous research. We've done dozens of randomized controlled trials on these very issues of how do you best discover the patient agenda under difficult circumstances, when people are in high states of emotional stress. And how do you guide people through the whole process of weighing their options against the difficult outcomes that they may have to trade off? And how do you best leverage the medical team so that you're delivering better care at an affordable cost? So I'm happy to say that the type of work that I've been doing, the type of tools that I've developed have really been thoroughly tested in this way. And I'm pretty confident in talking with Russell and talking with you all, pretty confident that they're going to work equally well with your clients because they're the same people who show up in our medical center with breast cancer and prostate cancer and head and neck cancer and colorectal cancer and spine problems and orthopedic issues. Those are all the areas we've used these models in, and they're the same people who show up and make that first call to their advisor. So overall, we find that this kind of discovery, engagement, and leverage leads to better psychological and physical health outcomes. So I just want to preview for you the discovery tool, which is called Select. And I think this fits pretty nicely into, from what I've been talking to you all, in the Premier Forces 2 kind of training on listening. Because really what we want to do, I know you all have a lot of processes for onboarding your clients and even the Envision process for kind of mapping their situation, kind of like taking a medical history, you're sort of taking a financial history with your clients. But in my view, this really needs to start earlier with a more client-centered discovery where you're actually putting aside everything you've learned as a professional and you're listening with your layperson ears. And so we use the iceberg metaphor to say that what a client or a patient will share with you at the very beginning of an encounter is usually 4 to 6 issues that are on the top of their mind and that are easily discoverable. But there's a whole iceberg that's deep underneath that. So the way we train doctors and medical students and other providers is to start off by just writing down, listen without interrupting, and writing down the 4 to 6 bullet points you're going to get when you ask somebody, so what's on your mind, what brings you here today? What are you concerned about? Very open-ended question. And then use a model called the ladder of inference to just get people to elaborate ever more concretely on what they've already started to tell you. And we do this really systematically. We have 4 to 6 bullet points. Let's say there are 4 bullet points. We listen without interrupting, write those down. Then we go back. I heard you say bullet point number 1. Now, would you tell me more about that? Or what else can you tell me about that? Can you be more specific? And then we do sub-bullets underneath that. And then we go to bullet 2. Now, you don't want to get sidetracked. A lot of medical doctors will get sidetracked by bullet number 1, spend all of the visit on bullet number 1, but they haven't elicited the whole agenda. You got to get the whole agenda out on the table first. So anyway, you go through that process, get the sub-bullets under each bullet. So you take 4 to 6 issues, and after you've laddered them, you get to 6 to 12 issues, maybe 12 to 18 issues. And then you bring your professional expertise to bear. You bring your checklist. And this can take the form of priority cards. I heard a good acronym, FORM, family, occupation, recreation, and money. I'm learning. So you can bring that kind of checklist and prompt people, because although they've gone deep on the iceberg, they also need to go broad. There may be issues kind of to the left and right of what they're already thinking about that they also need to be thinking about. So they'll thank you for that. But we want to start with their agenda, then do the checklist. And then by the end, you need to triage that list. And you need to say to people, okay, today we're going to spend the most time on the things that are most important to you. And so we need to do some triage and understand that there's some of these issues that I'm going to turf to my colleagues, my nurse or my CA or whoever's helping me. And there are some issues we're going to have to talk about another time. And so that triage process, the whole thing creates a written discovery note. And by the way, this discovery note is for both of you. I work in an environment where doctors are constantly dictating notes that go in the file, and the notes are for the use of medical, legal purposes, reimbursement, insurance, other professionals, and they're almost never shared with the patient. And when they are, I don't know if you've ever read your dictated notes, it's pretty much gibberish. A lot of jargon, and it's almost like it wasn't the same meeting. So you want to create a discovery note that is for both of you, that both of you should have a copy of. So I attended the session on documentation. I think this is a natural way to do documentation that produces a benefit, not just for your firm and for your protection and for your recall later, but also for the client. So the other major model we've developed is a model for walking people through the decision-making process. When you actually get to an inflection point, when you've discovered the agenda and you've identified some kind of, I went to another session on transitions, and you've identified some inflection point in somebody's life, they actually need to make a decision about whether to sell the house, about when to retire, about whether to move from one type of investment to another type of investment. So how do you have a systematic process, so you're not just winging it, but you have a systematic process that you can teach to your junior colleagues and that you can practice and improve on. And I won't have time to go into this in as much detail as I just did the iceberg, but this one is called Scoped. And it's basically a staircase. It's like all problem-solving techniques, you start with, well, what do we know about your situation? And you jot that down. You're going to create a scoped note. So you jot that down. What do we know about what are the key facts we know about your situation? And then what do we know about what choices are available to you? We're not going to actually evaluate the choices yet. We're just going to write down some of the choices that are available. It's a brainstorming thing. And then let's get clear. Once you understand kind of the context, that's usually when you can get clearer on your priorities. It's very hard to articulate priorities without understanding kind of the situation and the choices. So you get to this point, and now you're ready to do objectives. And then you talk about the people. And the whole time you're creating bullet points, documenting your scoped note, and you talk about the people and their roles and responsibilities in making the decision and then implementing it. And then finally, you need to help evaluate the decision, and we've got tools for that, building a kind of an evaluation table, and then arriving at a decision. So this has been adopted now, I'm happy to say, by the cancer support community, which is a nationwide organization, used to be Gilda's Club, the wellness community. I'm sure many of you have heard of them or worked with them. And so they're doing this nationwide now through a program called Open to Options in medicine. So I'll move on just to say that leverage is probably, as I said, the most important thing we do in healthcare is figure out how do we shift the time, the personnel, the tasks, and the place in which we engage in and we discover the client agenda. So we have, in our medical center, we have college student interns calling patients in advance of their visits to connect them with high-quality information materials, because otherwise everyone's lost on the internet. And then also on that phone call, beginning the process of discovering the patient agenda, of writing down using the select process, the iceberg, right? And then that note gets communicated to the physician. So then everyone's practicing at the top of their license. The physician comes in, can see the agenda, can do a little further elaboration on it, and then can get to the scoped process. So you can just see we've taken some things by telephone, done them before the visit, done other things in person using different personnel. I mean, that's all practice management for you all. But I just want to encourage you to think about it in ways that really kind of stretch the canvas across the whole client journey. Lots more to say about that, but in the interest of time, let me just get back to the Q&A, because you and I agreed we're going to have a little discussion. I will just say there's more materials that Alex, the account manager for Wells Fargo at Russell, is happy to take your email inquiries. I won't be offended if you email them right now, and get some materials for kind of follow-on education. And of course, Russell is really committed to doing this over the next few years, rolling out with events and education to the extent that this is all of interest.
Well, it struck me like a lightning bolt, and was some of the most liberating knowledge to understand that there is a path through discovery of those that have gone before to help you to control what's uncontrollable. And it's much like you learn from your clients, you learn from your own experiences, and unless you can take those tough things that you go through, whether it's a market meltdown, whether it's a family friend, whatever it may be, unless we learn from that, then we're just doomed to repeat in a way that is inconsolable the life lessons and the difficult things that have happened. So that's what struck me so much about this, and again, that liberation that comes from knowing that there's a way to make it easier. So, and then from the passion, what this guy has done and dedicated his life is pretty amazing. So I do want you to talk about, because we all know that in times of crisis, decision-making or judgment isn't always the best. We even see in our own industry where rules are made in times of crisis and they don't always apply to the future. We're dealing with some of that right now. So if you can help people to make better decisions while you're in that mode of crisis where people tend to head in the sand, not want to look up, and do nothing at the exact time where you need to do something, then we really help people. So how do you help people at that time of crisis?
Right.
When there's head in the sand,
right.
Don't want to look up. And then what's interesting is that there are different reactions. So tell me, because you've told me some things that were, again, some of the most helpful knowledge that I've gained.
So I was in, earlier sessions in this conference where people talked about the fight, flight, or freeze reaction that you have in a crisis. And so I think any advisor, physician or financial advisor, really needs to have kind of a repertoire to deal with that, because they're different. And I think human nature, Kurt Levine and other kind of social scientists suggested that wherever somebody is at, if they're having a fight reaction, and you feel like, well, that might not be in your best interest, and I, as your advisor, need to help you with that, there's a natural tendency to want to push back. But it's kind of like, Newton's second law. For every, force, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if you encounter somebody who's fighting, and you want to sort of persuade them that now might be the time to sort of step back, it's going to be very difficult to persuade them of that. I think you have to do a little judo, and this goes for fleeing and freezing as well. And the judo is you have to accept that energy. You have to say, yeah, this is really a terrifying thing, and I can completely understand. We deal with people who maybe face a precancerous condition that our physicians know is not life-threatening, but people come in and say, I just want it out. In fact, while you're at it, take both breaths, right? I mean, we're dealing with a lot of that. And so I think the first thing you have to do is honor that reaction and say, yeah, I understand that, and that's a sensible, life-preserving kind of reaction. But you do want to say to people, let's also try to look at some other approaches. If you went down this path, let's just understand the implications of that. And where some of the downsides might be. And that's kind of a motivational interviewing technique to get people to tell you what the downside of their initial fight reaction might be. So anyway, there's a lot more to say about this, but
No,
you want to.
Well, no, because it's just interesting that there are, and the good news is, when you really research and study people, that we're not all that different, and that there is some level of predictability when things are seemingly or completely unpredictable.
Yeah.
And that's what I've learned from you in these discussions. And believe me, we spent half of last Sunday talking until he had to go to the Muppet Show with his kids. But so he is a real guy on top of that. But no. When you talked about that people will react in various ways, that you can identify so that you're in best position to not be taken aback by the reactions, but really help people through at a time when they need to exercise the best judgment that they've ever exercised when it doesn't seem like they can. So it is the pushback. So what are the other reactions?
Right. Well, so I think I don't want to be a hammer with a nail or a nail with a hammer, whatever the expression is, but that discovery process of, select, when somebody comes to you with a lot of emotion in the direction of either fight, flight, or freeze, the sort of judo reaction is to just take some notes, let me write down what you're saying and understand it. Let me get you to elaborate on it. People, when they start elaborating on their emotional reactions, they start to wind themselves down a little bit. And then let me bring my checklist to make sure we're covering all the bases. So you're starting really with where they are, you're sort of honoring that, you're absorbing all that energy, and you're writing it down, creating a discovery note, and feeding that back to the client. And Mark Twain said, "I write so I can see what I think." And that's really important for the client, for you to capture the client's words, not in your professional framework. I want you to put that aside a little bit, but in the client's own words, for you to capture that, print it out, give it to them physically so they can look at it. People have a real aha reaction when they actually, see in writing what they are thinking and saying to you. So my prescription really is that kind of flexible approach to honor whatever the reaction is, but do it in a client-centered way and document it and feed it back to them. And I recommend this select process, the iceberg.
No, there is something on the receiving end when somebody writes down what you say. It flat out just makes you feel pretty good, because it makes you feel like whatever you're saying is that important to someone.
Yeah.
So there is, and in our business, clearly we live in a world of exactness, but we are ruled by emotion. And the two don't always intersect at a great spot. So how do you control, knowing fully well that there are things that will always make sense, even though it seems like it doesn't at the time make sense, because your emotions are overruling what your intellect is telling you? How do you come to grips with taking out that emotion so that some level of intellect can override that?
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah, it is. It is. I have, sort of distilled from all the decision science and behavioral finance and all that stuff you may have been reading, all those books. I've got a model for understanding the 5 drivers of decision making. And it's, the first one, the biggest driver is somatic. It's the body and the instincts and the emotions. That reaction, and as I've said, you've got to honor that. But there are 4 others too. And so what I find is that if you can use those as a kind of a checks and balances to check in with people and say, okay, I've heard you on this kind of reaction you're having, maybe the fight, flight, or freeze reaction, whichever of those it is. But let's check in on some other dimensions too. There's a way of looking at this socially. That's the second big driver of decision making, is what are the sort of social influences? What are your best advisors, the people who care most about you, doing or recommending? And sometimes other people who've known us a very long time know us better than we know ourselves in the moment. And sometimes they have our future selves' best interest at heart. And so you can go out to your kind of support community and check in with them. And it's checks and balances, because sometimes you'll get sort of people coalescing around one thing or another. There may be some conflict. You got to be comfortable with that idea that there's going to be conflict, and that over time you're going to arrive at something. People can also look to their spiritual world for guidance, to higher powers. That's the third kind of driver of decision making. They can look to their own identity. I call this the soulful driver, looking inside at their self-image and their identity, which sometimes actually changes during periods of crisis. And then finally, the fifth one, but the one that many people in this room may start with, like probably I do as an engineer, is the scientific driver. And that's when you're looking at data and evidence. So if you can understand that it's not all just emotion versus facts and logic, that there's also other things in between, those social and spiritual and soulful drivers of decision making. I mean, I found that very helpful in terms of counseling people and checking in on all those dimensions. And what you're really looking for at the end of the day is something to line up, those things to kind of line up and lead to clarity, serenity, and harmony. So clarity is knowing what to do, serenity is the confidence that you've chosen wisely, and harmony is knowing that you have the resources to follow through on your course of action. If you don't get to those three things, it's difficult. But even in very difficult circumstances, you can often find a path forward where everything does line up for you.
And what to me is so helpful about all of this, there is a very interesting book called Nudge. And it talks about when you have in your charge big, serious responsibilities, that you indeed have a responsibility to help people make a better decision. Much like with companies helping people that a 401k is easy to get into but hard to get out of, knowing that we have to lead people to make better decisions. But the irony in it all is where those decisions are the biggest is where you get the least amount of practice. Where the consequences and the stakes are the highest is where you have the least amount of time that has gone before to help you with that. So to me, when it's the big stuff in life that you can't practice for, and then you all are being asked to do that every day, because I think about this, it's not just your life or your client's life, it's your life. So you're doing double duty on all of this. So to be in position where you've in effect had a chance to practice the difficult stuff that most people never get to practice for, how do you get help with that? And then what we talked about, which was so interesting, and I want you to elaborate on this, was that much like the things we learn, and one of the things I learned this from one of my best girlfriends, and this was the best trick ever. She was really funny. One trick she told me, she also got to travel a lot and go to great hotels, and she came back from one of these trips and she said that was the best hotel I've ever been to. And it was like some regular Marriott. It was sort of like this. I mean, it was a great spot, but it wasn't nearly to the glamour levels of some of these other hotels. And I said, Lori, why is that the best hotel you've ever been to? And she said, because the lighting was so good, every time I looked in the mirror, I thought I was beautiful. Well, I love that. What I also learned from Lori, and this was a great life lesson, she's a really smart woman, and she said, you know those things we learn at work about negotiating, about listening, about getting what you want? She said, I tried it at home. And I'm looking at her and I said, you tried it on your husband? And I'm thinking to myself, that is so manipulative. And she's seeing what I'm thinking. She goes, it's not manipulative at all. You get what you want. It's a better way to get your point across. So if you take the things that we are taught here, because we live in real life. And the reason why some of these things are taught, like I learned about Envision, I learned why Envision is so important to us as clients. Because the ideal, acceptable thing, when people get what that means, and then you apply it to everything that is real and deep in your life. I had to go through some things, and I was lucky, because I'm listening, and I can't believe that Jeff was not the counsel to my surgeon who coordinated with my oncologist and with my radiologist, because he got to know me as a person. He asked me questions. He asked me discovery. He asked deeper, what do you feel about this? What do you think about this? And he came to a conclusion that I really like to talk. That didn't take long for him to figure that out. And so he's going through the cure the disease thing, and he's realizing I can't put this person who loves life, who loves to talk, in a position where the cure is worse than the disease. And that's what Envision does. It allows you to make those trade-offs and come to them with a level of understanding what you really think, what you really believe, what matters, and then to have someone help you through that. Because we've talked about this, and I want you to, we're running out of time, because I do want you to touch on this one last thing. Because we talked about it, and I said, I don't think so. I don't think it's right for this crowd. But I think it is right for this crowd. Because what you talked about was trust. Because we traded back and forth all these crazy, this guy can write. So we traded back all of these emails and lengthy discussions. So it wasn't just emails. It was really discussions and then some phone conversations as well. But discussions, and he said, I want to talk about trust. And I said, wrong audience. I said, these people got it. They are the most trusted people in their clients' lives. But he said, maybe not.
No, I think that's probably true. I just think that often we think about patients finding a doctor that they can trust, or clients finding an advisor they can trust. And we're starting to really turn that equation a little bit on its head to say, you demonstrating that you trust your client through really client-centered engagement and discovery, that's a sign of the mutuality. So when I will tell people, find a doctor who trusts you, who really is listening, who's really patient-centered, who's really client-centered, and gets your agenda on the table. So I think, and then the other point about trust is just, it's not just about finding a doctor, it's about finding a system that's, we know from aviation, we know from medicine, we know from financial services that safety and quality are system properties. There's only so much an individual heroic advisor can do. So you all are in a great ecosystem, and I think it's something that your clients can be. I'm a Wells Fargo client myself, and your clients can be really confident, and they do need to be able to trust the system. They need to be able to trust you and your team and everything that you've got sort of around you. So I think it's very much a positive message for this audience that
it is,
you can invoke.
Because that systemization allows that trust to be leveraged, and then to create within your team that same leverage of trust with clients on a different level, so that you don't own everything, to me, which is very significant. We're going to probably run out of time here, but I did want to say one thing about Russell. And I knew Russell as a consulting entity back in my asset management days in New York. And Russell coined the phrase for the industry, people, process, and performance. And that's what the rest of the industry followed as asset managers. Those were the three things that you were fiercely focused on. If you didn't deliver that, you couldn't be in business. But what Russell did, much like exactly what they're doing right now, is to turn this stuff upside down on its ear. What you all did was to change those three P's into what the business is really about, which is purpose. Does your business have a purpose every single day? It's about progress. Is what you're doing, what you're focused on, is it bringing progress to your practice, to your clients every day? And lastly, this was the first entity that brought to the business a word that we use over and over and over, because if you don't have this, you just can't do it because it's too hard. And the third P is passion. And you can only have, the thing about passion is that it can exhaust you. And you're not in position to have that passion exhausted, because people need you just too much. So this systemization, this realization, this research, this knowledge, this probing, this questioning, I think is one of the answers that's going to give you the wherewithal to take this thing from good and to totally lead us into greatness. And I know, because you helped me, you did it for me, creating miracles is not easy. It's not easy, but it's definitely doable. So thank you all for what you do and who you are. And thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Russell.
Thank you. Thanks, Sharon. That was great. That was great. Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah.